Last week, I sat in on a strategy meeting for a mid-sized tech firm that was, in their own words, bleeding out because they couldn't find experienced project managers. The CEO was pacing the room, ranting about the nationwide labor shortage and how the newer hires just didn't have the instinct to handle high-stakes crises. He looked genuinely desperate, like a man looking for a lifeline in a storm. Then, his HR director mentioned a candidate who had reached out that morning, someone who had managed global transitions for over 25 years and had successfully navigated three major economic crashes. For a split second, there was a palpable sense of relief in the room. But then she added one detail. He's 58. The atmosphere shifted instantly. The CEO didn't even ask to see their resume. He just sighed, leaned back, and muttered, "He'll be too rigid, probably doesn't know the latest tools. Let's keep looking for someone fresher." Just like that, the solution to his crisis was dismissed without a second thought. It was a staggering moment of cognitive dissonance. Here was a man drowning in a lake, pushing away a life jacket because it looked too old-fashioned. This wasn't a calculated business move. It was a reflex. It made me realize that our modern job market is currently trapped in a bizarre paradox. Companies are crying out for expertise while systematically throwing it in the trash. We've reached a point where we value a candidate's knowledge of the latest buzzwords more than their ability to actually hear the rattle in the engine before it explodes. That instantaneous dismissal, the shift from desperate need to categorical rejection based on a birth year, left me wondering, when did we decide that experience was a liability instead of an asset? And why is the corporate world so willing to let its most valuable resource walk out the door just because they've lived through enough history to actually understand it? Okay, so let's unpack this. Our mission today, really, is to look at this precise corporate paradox. We need to measure the immediate economic costs of the systemic rejection. I mean, how much are companies actually losing when they dismiss that institutional memory? And then we're going to explore the concrete, structural, and policy fixes. Things from government incentives designed to counter this market failure, all the way to the organizational design changes needed internally. All the things necessary to stop companies from wasting what is, well, arguably their most valuable resource, accumulated human knowledge. You know, we often hear this analogy that as we age, our CPU speed might decline a bit, but our storage and interconnectivity they increase exponentially.
Right. We trade milliseconds of input speed for decades of domain knowledge and integrated context. Yeah. So this deep dive is all about valuing that strategic storage capacity.
And that idea you just mentioned, that storage and interconnectivity of experience, is exactly why we have to reject this modern corporate myth that experience is an expired model. There's a phrase they use in the German labor market discussion. Erfahrung ist kein Auslaufmodell. And it really captures the core truth. It means experience is not an obsolete model. The deep value older workers bring. You can't learn it in a classroom. You can't download it into a large language model. It's applied pattern recognition. It's the ability to know that the crisis you're facing today isn't unique. It's just the third, maybe slightly masked iteration of a problem you already solved 20 years ago.
But the hiring models, they're not set up for that.
No. Unfortunately, many hiring models are structurally designed to screen this essential applied wisdom out based solely on, well, chronological proxies, based on a birth year. So let's start there. Let's start with a moment where the algorithms, the modern tools just completely failed, forcing companies to rely on that deep pattern recognition. I came across this really compelling narrative when I was researching the 2022 supply chain crisis, a period where global logistics, it essentially entered a state of market chaos.
Oh, absolutely.
You had the unprecedented geopolitical shifts, the war in Ukraine, lingering pandemic effects. It was a perfect storm.
And that was a perfect stress test for modern, hyper-optimized systems. Mm-hmm. These systems are built for efficiency, They're predicated on stable, predictable inputs.
Right.
When the environment changes that drastically, the model just breaks. It's the classic failure mode. You're relying entirely on data from the last 5 years, which means you have no mechanism, no way to handle a geopolitical shock that echoes the 1970s oil crises or the late 90s Asian market volatility.
So panic sets in.
Total panic, because the high-speed data has gone silent.
That's precisely what happened in this large logistics firm based in Frankfurt. The younger analysts, they were highly trained, great with new software, but they just lacked that historical context. They were absolutely paralyzed.
They're staring at screens full of broken models.
Exactly. Their sophisticated predictive algorithms couldn't generate new forecasts because the variables were unprecedented in recent history. They were just stuck.
It's the difference between knowing the theory of navigation and having actually sailed through a hurricane.
That's a great way to put it.
They knew the charts, but when the seas turned into something they hadn't mapped, they didn't know which immediate action to take.
That's where Elias, a veteran manager who was 62 and kind of ironically on the invisible list for upcoming retirement, that's where he stepped in. While the whole room was fixated on trying to patch these data gaps, Elias recognized a pattern that just wasn't in the software. He articulated that the speed of the disruption and the simultaneous blockages at key global ports, it mirrored the liquidity and market volatility he'd experienced during the late 90s Asian financial crisis.
So he was reaching back decades.
Decades. He said the catalysts were different, a financial contagion then, a physical contagion, and a war now, but the systemic reaction was identical. Fractured trust and localized hoarding.
He was synthesizing context. He knew that when global systems seize up like that, the default corporate reaction of centralizing your stock for efficiency
It becomes a huge liability.
a suicidal liability. The solution had to be counterintuitive to everything they had learned over the last 2 decades.
And his solution was radical at the time, a pivot to localized warehousing. Totally counterintuitive. He insisted on breaking up these massive mega hubs that were failing due to gridlock and moving stock closer to regional endpoints, even if it meant a temporary hit to efficiency.
Wow.
He argued that reliability, even slow reliability, was worth far more than the promise of a high efficiency that just could not be delivered.
That is the application of deep wisdom. I mean, any junior analyst could point out that localized warehousing raises immediate operational cost and contradicts the last decade of logistics optimization theory.
Of course.
But Elias, having lived through multiple systemic shocks, he knew that trade-off was necessary. He understood that in a crisis, the most expensive cost isn't holding too much inventory. It's being forced to halt production entirely because you can't get to that inventory.
And that pivot, prioritizing resilience over short-term efficiency, it saved the company from a total standstill. It distinguished them from competitors who were just completely gridlocked waiting for the global ports to clear.
It's such a powerful illustration of the core economic value of retained institutional knowledge.
A human insurance policy.
It acts as a human insurance policy against chaos. Exactly. When those sophisticated predictive tools fail, you absolutely need human leaders who possess that applied pattern recognition. Experience allows leaders not just to recognize historical patterns, but crucially, to know which solutions tried in the past only looked good on paper versus those that actually worked in the messy reality of the market.
That's a key distinction.
It is. The difference between Elias and the young analysts wasn't raw mental processing speed. It was having a rich mental library of failure points and effective workarounds developed across multiple economic cycles. When the world breaks, the most resilient businesses are those that haven't purged the people who remember how the world broke the last time.
Which makes that knee-jerk rejection of the 58-year-old project manager we started with feel not just silly, but
economically self-sabotaging.
Completely. If companies are systematically dismissing people who hold that human insurance policy, they are actively increasing their long-term risk exposure to global instability.
True.
They're literally paying a resilience premium by demanding youth.
And this leads us directly to the documented reality of age discrimination in hiring. Because that institutional dismissal, it's backed up by consistent audit data. The biases are pervasive.
Right. These resume audit studies, I've seen them, and they consistently highlight this staggering finding. Older job applicants receive fewer interview invitations than their younger counterparts.
Even with equivalent qualifications.
Or often superior qualifications. It's a structural prejudice that's baked in before a hiring manager even speaks to the person.
And the irony is that while the market is desperately seeking that strategic wisdom, the screening process is simultaneously prioritizing this sort of superficial cultural fit.
Which is where we get the story from the tech industry.
Exactly. This finding about a 53-year-old engineer who wasn't called back after he revealed during an initial screen that he didn't drink craft beer.
It sounds absurd when you say it out loud.
Right.
But it illustrates a deeper, really troubling focus on perceived cultural homogeneity over genuine core competence.
Absolutely. The hiring decision becomes less about the applicant's ability to solve complex engineering problems, the whole reason they were hiring in the first place, and more about whether they fit the arbitrary social norms of the existing, likely younger team.
The company is actively looking for someone fresher, as that CEO said, even if that freshness comes at the expense of necessary high-stakes experience.
So if the rejection isn't just about A lack of fluency with the latest Slack features. What are the explicit stereotypes that are driving these decisions?
They're multi-layered, and they often contradict the stated needs of the job. Firstly, you have that idea of being too rigid.
Which is a catch-all term.
It's a total catch-all. It often translates to unwilling to adopt our often untested, inefficient processes.
Right. Then there's the assumption that they won't know the latest tools, even if decades of experience demonstrate superior adaptability and, frankly, the ability to evaluate new tools critically instead of just adopting them.
But I think the most damning stereotype, especially in high-pressure environments, is the perception of lifestyle.
That they won't work the crazy hours.
Exactly. They're assumed to be unwilling to work the long, intense, often unsustainable hours typical of startup culture, or that they lack the sheer processing speed of younger workers. They mistake speed of execution for strategic depth.
And that's where your CPU and storage metaphor really comes into play. Employers are demanding the computational speed of a newly minted processor, but they are ignoring the terabytes of integrated domain knowledge and the superior operating system that comes with experience.
You trade raw, instantaneous input speed for decades of integrated domain knowledge and superior strategic pattern recognition. I mean, when you're having a high-stakes surgery, you want the surgeon with the steady hands and decades of storage.
Not the one who can move their fingers marginally faster. But the hiring system often only measures the movement speed.
And this leads to this incredibly worrying gray zone problem, which shows how age discrimination impacts people who are nowhere near traditional retirement age. We're talking about mid-career individuals trying to pivot.
Oh, this is a huge issue.
Let's take that specific example.
Yeah.
Someone who is 40, maybe has a liberal arts degree, say, music, but they've recently completed a competitive, high-intensity coding boot camp. They've done everything society asked of them.
They've recognized a market need, they've retrained, they've gained a new, valuable skill set.
But the market response to this person is often brutal and economically irrational. They find themselves in this gray zone because they are seen simultaneously as too old for a junior role and too inexperienced for a senior role.
How did that logic even work?
Well, they're too old for a junior role for two reasons. First, chronological age, which often leads to an implicit assumption of higher wage expectations. The employer doesn't want to hire a 40-year-old for the salary of a 22-year-old.
Okay.
And second, there's the perceived difficulty of managing someone older than the immediate supervisor.
Right, the social dynamic.
But then they're deemed too inexperienced for a senior role because the majority of their professional life wasn't spent in the specific field. It completely disregards the transferable skills, project management, client communication, general professional maturity that they accumulated in their previous career.
So they're shut out completely.
Totally. Right at the moment, they have the greatest motivation and often the greatest financial need to reinvent themselves.
It's a tragedy of wasted potential. And it demonstrates that the system isn't just biased against those approaching retirement. It's biased against anyone who doesn't fit a narrow, linear career path dictated by a specific age bracket and perfect chronology.
Which means this systemic failure to utilize capable workers demands structural solutions.
Right.
It has to go beyond simple company-level good intentions.
Exactly. Since we've established that the market suffers from this systemic, irrational bias against experience, we can't rely on employers alone to solve the problem. This is where government intervention becomes essential, often taking the form of what are called active labor market policies, or ALMPs.
Right, ALMPs. They're designed to counteract these deep-seated hiring biases.
So let's unpack those ALMPs, because they cover a huge range of measures. But when we talk about supporting older workers, we are really focused on what are termed hiring subsidies.
Okay, so how do they work?
Hiring subsidies are key demand-side measures. Basically, they're government incentives that directly compensate employers to reduce the financial risk and the immediate cost of hiring specific disadvantaged groups, with older workers being a high priority.
So they come in a couple of forms, right?
Two primary forms. You have direct wage subsidies paid out over a fixed period, or you have targeted reductions in Social Security contributions.
So the government is essentially offering a structural way to offset the employer's perceived risk that the older worker will be, rigid or suffer from that wage productivity mismatch we were just talking about.
Precisely. And the government has three core rationales for deploying these subsidies. First, the economic rationale, to stimulate net new job creation, particularly during downturns when employers are naturally reluctant to hire anyone. Second, the social rationale, to support harder-to-place groups like the long-term unemployed or older workers, which keeps them connected and reduces reliance on state support.
And what's the third?
The third, and this is often overlooked, is the upskilling rationale. Use the subsidized employment period to provide work experience and training, which significantly increases the worker's long-term chance of sustainable, unsubsidized employment after the policy ends.
Let's look at how these targeted subsidies work in practice, especially in European nations that have been struggling with demographic shifts for decades. France, for example, has this very structured, layered system.
Yes, their professionalization contract. France provides a powerful illustration of how you can layer incentives. For all employers hiring unemployed adults over 26, there's already a supplementary flat subsidy, which can be up to 2,000 euros per contract. That covers basic integration costs.
But that's for everyone over 26. What's the specific part for older workers?
The crucial element is the additional specific subsidy of another 2,000 euros for workers aged 45 and over. And that's combined with specific exemptions from Social Security contributions.
So they're literally providing a 100% bonus incentive specifically for that targeted age group. It makes the older worker an immediately more attractive and cheaper proposition.
Exactly. How does this compare to Germany's approach? Because they focus heavily on the duration of the subsidy.
They do. Germany implemented wage subsidies for older workers aged 50 and above. The core mechanism is similar, covering between 30 and 50% of the wages.
But the key difference is the maximum duration.
That's right. Recruitment of older workers can be subsidized for a massive 12 to 36 months compared to only 12 months for younger workers under 50.
So the intention seems clear. Give the employer a long ramp-up period up to 3 years to fully integrate the worker. Let them overcome their initial biases and truly see the value.
That is the intention. However, policy analysts have identified a pretty significant caveat in the German model. They call it the deadweight effect.
Okay, explain that deadweight effect for us. It's a critical concept in evaluating whether these policies actually work.
The deadweight effect happens when a subsidy is paid for a hire that the firm would have made anyway, even without the financial incentive.
It's wasted money.
It's wasted money. But in the German model, the risk is compounded because the subsidy for older workers is not legally linked to a condition that they retain the employee after the subsidy period ends.
There's no long-term commitment required.
None. So what happens in practice is that companies, especially smaller firms that are highly cost-sensitive, use that 36-month period as a source of temporary, partially paid labor.
And as the end of the subsidy approaches.
The underlying systemic issue, that perception of the wage productivity mismatch, it comes right back. The company realizes that retaining the worker at the now fully costed salary is perceived as too expensive. So there's a huge danger that a firm hires the older worker just to collect the subsidy and then cycles them out.
So it's just postponing the unemployment period rather than preventing it.
Exactly. It makes the policy economically inefficient, even if it provides temporary support. It shows that the policy has to do more than just mitigate cost. It has to enforce a long-term commitment.
Which brings us to Austria's success model, Come Back. It seems to have managed this balancing act a bit more successfully by introducing flexibility.
So detail the comeback integration subsidy. Why does it get better retention results?
The Austrian comeback program targets both older workers and the long-term unemployed, but its success with the older cohort is really noteworthy. It worked because it leverages existing experience and formal qualifications. It avoids that mandatory retraining that can be seen as irrelevant or demoralizing.
But the key innovation is about working hours.
Most importantly, yes. It addresses the physical demands of long working lives by negotiating specific working time and thus income thresholds.
So rather than forcing a 60-year-old manual worker into a full-time, physically grueling role, they actually formalize part-time arrangements.
Precisely. The minimum working time is often set at 50% of a full-time job. This flexibility allows older individuals to successfully manage minor health issues, reduce physical strain, or handle increasing caregiving responsibilities without exiting the labor market entirely.
It transforms a perceived liability, the health risk, the need for balance, into a flexible asset. You get retained skills on a customized schedule.
And the deadweight data proves the effectiveness of this nuanced approach. It shows the policy is genuinely stimulating new demand.
Okay, so what are the numbers?
The deadweight effect for older people in the comeback program, the percentage of hires that would happen without the subsidy, is around 44%. Now that figure is notably lower than the general average deadweight effect of 52% you see in broader subsidy programs.
So that 8-point difference suggests this measure is genuinely creating new, sustainable job opportunities for that demographic, all driven by the flexibility built into the program.
So moving from policy mechanics back to tangible outcomes, we can look at how experience acts as this powerful stabilizing force, not just in a crisis, but in daily operations.
There was an excellent example of this from the construction sector in Tokyo.
Japan is at the forefront of the aging workforce challenge, so that makes sense.
A Tokyo construction firm was facing a catastrophic talent shortage, a crisis of institutional knowledge loss and just labor scarcity, until the government introduced specific tax incentives for hiring workers over 55.
And this led them to recruit a retired civil engineer, Mr. Sato.
This scenario is just a powerful lesson in systemic benefits. I mean, the immediate problem was a skills gap in a demanding high-risk sector, but the solution integrating a veteran provided these profound, often unquantified benefits that went way beyond filling the immediate vacancy.
Okay, so Mr. Sato was brought in primarily to oversee site safety and provide junior training. But what I found fascinating was the ripple effect. His presence didn't just fill a skills gap, it drastically reduced the churn rate of the younger staff.
How did that work? Was it just a calmer environment or something?
It was more foundational than that. The younger workers felt more secure having his steady hand for guidance. When an unexpected geotechnical issue came up, they had immediate access to Mr. Sato's decades of specialized knowledge.
So they could solve the problem efficiently instead of panicking.
Exactly. Instead of panicking, making costly errors, or defaulting to overly conservative delays. This reduced their stress and that feeling of being unsupported, which is often a key reason for high turnover in these high-pressure industries.
So he immediately reframes the veteran worker as a mentorship and retention tool. He wasn't just stabilizing the projects, he was stabilizing the entire workforce.
And here's the kicker, the measurable financial return. The firm's insurance premiums actually dropped because of Mr. Sato's meticulous, experience-based safety protocols derived not from a recent textbook, but from seeing what causes failures in practice over 30 years. They had fewer accidents and a demonstrably lower risk profile.
That demonstrates a direct, quantifiable financial return on institutional wisdom that fundamentally outweighs the cost of salary and benefits.
That example perfectly counteracts the simplistic bias that older workers are just more expensive. When you factor in the high cost of turnover and the tangible savings on insurance and liability, the veteran employee is a risk reduction mechanism. This insight needs to be central to how CFOs calculate the ROI on experienced labor.
And beyond direct subsidies and these organizational stabilizers, we see governments globally using broader structural tools, specifically pension reform, to influence labor participation and encourage people to work longer.
And policy adjustments to retirement ages have consistently demonstrated one of the strongest employment responses among all labor market policies. Raising the early retirement age, the ERA, and the statutory retirement age, the SRA, are proven policy levers for keeping mid to late career workers active.
We have substantial data on this response. In Austria, for instance, increasing the ERA by just 1 year, it raised employment rates among the affected population by approximately 9.8% for men and 11% for women.
That is a significant and immediate return on a policy adjustment. It shows people are willing and able to remain in the workforce if the structural incentives are aligned.
And the Netherlands provides an even stronger long-term example. They embarked on this gradual increase in the statutory retirement age, moving it from 65 in 2012 up to 66 years and 4 months by 2019.
And that adjustment resulted in a massive 21.2 percentage point increase in the employment rate for the affected group. It's the ultimate example of a supply-side response.
Yeah.
When the financial mechanism for retiring early is removed or delayed, people often choose to remain economically active.
Provided, and this is the key constraint, that the work opportunities and conditions are available.
Right. The lesson across all these policy interventions seems to be that relying purely on the goodwill of employers to overcome their unconscious biases is just economically naive. Governments have to intervene with targeted incentives and structural reforms to either offset the perceived financial risk or remove that early exit mechanism altogether.
And while government policy provides that essential structural framework and the financial nudges, the actual organizational design within the company, that's what dictates successful integration and the ultimate success of the workforce.
Which demands actively fostering collaboration that moves beyond the traditional one-way, top-down mentorship model.
And that brings us to one of the most proactive and fascinating organizational interventions, the rise of reverse mentoring. It fundamentally flips the learning dynamic.
So in this model, the younger, less experienced individuals are mentoring the older, more experienced ones.
Yeah, exactly. Creating a crucial two-way exchange of skills and perspectives.
And the primary driver for this shift is the accelerating digital skills gap. We're living in a period where technology changes faster than any previous generation.
I saw a survey by PwC that highlighted that 75% of senior executives believe a lack of digital skills within their workforce is one of the most significant threats to their business viability.
And reverse mentoring is a direct internal mechanism for addressing that reality, particularly for leaders who are baby boomers or Gen X.
It acknowledges the uncomfortable truth that while older generations possess the strategic depth and the history of the market, younger employees, Gen Z and younger millennials, they're the native speakers of emerging digital languages.
New software, specific AI tools, social media trends, decentralized organizational frameworks.
All of it. The young mentor helps the veteran bridge that immediate digital and cultural gap.
This concept is truly effective when it's implemented strategically, not just as a quick fix. I was deeply engaged by a story about an experiment in a London tech hub that really challenges how we view this digital divide.
They intentionally implemented a reverse mentoring program, pairing Chloe, a 22-year-old Gen Z designer, with Arthur, a 58-year-old senior partner.
That is the ideal collision point: deep history and future potential. It's an inherently high-friction partnership designed to force learning on both sides.
So walk us through the synergy that developed there.
Well, the initial dynamics were fraught. Arthur, the senior partner, admitted later that he was defensive. He saw the sessions as a babysitting exercise for his perceived lack of, TikTok-era tech fluency.
And Chloe.
Chloe was intimidated by his seniority and immense professional reputation. But they quickly moved past the initial awkwardness because the learning gap was so clearly defined. Chloe began teaching Arthur the nuances of AI-driven interface design. Specifically, how to use generative AI tools to rapidly prototype client-facing systems.
Okay, so Chloe was delivering the speed and the cutting-edge capability. But what did Arthur, the veteran, contribute back that proved so invaluable?
Well, while Chloe was focused on the interface design speed, Arthur started explaining the human logic behind client psychology and the necessity of structural integrity in large-scale systems. He taught her, for example, why a seemingly efficient digital shortcut might violate a client's specific regulatory compliance requirements, knowledge he had accrued over decades of handling high-stakes contracts. He introduced the concept of failure points they just can't see on a wireframe diagram.
So Chloe taught him the how to make a fast, modern product, while Arthur taught her the why and the consequences.
Exactly. Why the client asks for that feature, or why a speed-focused shortcut might introduce systemic, non-recoverable risk later in the project lifecycle.
So they weren't just exchanging skills.
Not at all. They ended up co-authoring a new project management style. This style blended Chloe's digital fluency and emphasis on speed with Arthur's foundational stability and deep understanding of human factors and legal implications.
And the firm realized this collaboration achieved a level of problem solving, that rapid innovation paired with robust, tested stability, that neither of them could have reached working alone in a homogeneous, single-generation team.
It's a tangible example of mutual respect transforming a generational gap into a profoundly productive, innovative bridge.
And the organizational benefits of formalizing this type of cross-generational exchange are profound. They extend way beyond just digital fluency. You mentioned innovation, which is the immediate outcome.
Right. Younger, unconventional approaches naturally challenge established norms, but the seasoned employee provides the necessary historical context and practicality to transform those raw, innovative concepts into actionable, viable strategies. They provide the grounding reality check.
And crucially, it directly supports effective succession planning, which is often cited as the biggest long-term challenge facing aging workforces.
Yes, absolutely. The veterans can systematically pass down institutional wisdom, the unwritten rules of the firm, the political landscape of clients, the subtle failure points of old systems to their potential successors.
And at the same time,
concurrently, the young mentors offer invaluable insights into emerging industry trends and the expectations of future talent. It prepares the entire organization for the dynamic landscape ahead. It's a knowledge transfer mechanism that moves in two critical directions.
And furthermore, these programs are proving to be powerful tools for diversity and inclusion, expanding the understanding of senior leadership beyond just age.
That's right. Companies like IBM and PwC have used formalized reverse mentoring programs to sensitize senior leaders to the diverse perspectives and experiences of younger, minority, or LGBT employees.
It helps senior leadership understand the challenges and unique insights held by groups whose experiences may be far removed from their own.
And that fosters a more inclusive and empathetic corporate culture at the highest level.
Okay, so implementing reverse mentoring sounds ideal, but it must face practical and psychological resistance. What challenges do organizations encounter when they try to put this structure in place?
The resistance is inherent in the power structure. Firstly, older generations can be highly resistant to changing established methodologies. Secondly, navigating those power dynamics is profoundly difficult.
Right.
When a senior individual suddenly finds themselves in the mentee role, it can be a humbling, even uncomfortable psychological experience. Their whole identity is wrapped up in being the expert.
And for the younger employee,
They might be intimidated or hesitant to speak candidly or critique an executive's actions. And practically, you always have the issues of time constraints for busy professionals, making dedicated mentoring slots hard to protect.
so to make it work, it can't just be a casual ad hoc arrangement. The sources outline these essential implementation steps to move it from a nice idea to a legitimate professional development tool.
And the first step is non-negotiable. Securing visible leadership support. Leaders must not merely endorse the program via email. They have to actively participate.
So if the CEO is willing to be mentored on using a new analytical platform by an entry-level employee,
It sets a positive, vulnerability-driven example for the entire organization. It validates the program's strategic value.
and the matching process has to be intentional.
It must be. The pairs have to be matched based on complementary skills and clear learning goals, ensuring a productive fit in terms of both communication styles and the specific knowledge deficit being addressed.
For instance, pairing a sales executive who struggles with digital presentations with a marketing junior who excels in video editing and visualization.
Exactly. And finally, you have to formalize the relationship to remove any ambiguity.
Formalization meaning creating binding agreements like a regular project.
Precisely. Mentoring agreements must define the scope of the relationship, the meeting schedules, which must be protected from external cancellation, and the specific, measurable objectives and desired outcomes.
That structure ensures that reverse mentoring is recognized as a strategic, measurable professional development tool. It moves it out of the realm of feel-good HR initiatives and into the core business strategy.
So we've focused extensively on recruiting older workers and integrating them, but retention is an equally, if not more, significant challenge.
We have to adopt a life cycle perspective, understanding that career interventions need to occur far earlier than the typical retirement horizon. Ensuring stability in your 50s is the anchor for a longer career.
And that life cycle view is starkly supported by longitudinal data. Employment stability in one's 50s is strongly correlated with working at age 62 or 63.
If you lose your job in your early 50s, the chances of re-entering the workforce, especially at an equivalent salary, they just plummet because of age discrimination and the specialization of skills.
The data is compelling. Approximately 69% of those who were steadily employed throughout their 50s remain employed at some point in their early 60s.
But that figure plummets to a mere 8% for those who are never employed in their 50s.
So the challenge isn't just about getting someone back to work at 60. It's about proactively preventing them from leaving the workforce in the first place when they're 52.
And the retention challenge is massive even for those currently employed. Data shows that just over half of working 55 to 59-year-olds leave their employer by the time they reach 60-64.
So job retention is critical because it allows workers to continue utilizing their firm-specific knowledge and extensive experience, maintaining that institutional memory we value so highly.
And to address this loss of valuable talent, we have to look at redesigning the work itself, starting with the core issue of job quality.
Job quality is a comprehensive metric. It's everything from earnings and job security to physical working conditions and autonomy.
And the evidence shows that poor quality, specifically low autonomy and physically demanding conditions, significantly increases the risk of early exit, especially for older manual workers.
So if an older worker is in a physically grueling job with low control over their daily schedule, they are exponentially more likely to quit early due to health concerns. It undermines all the economic and policy efforts to keep them working.
This is where flexibility becomes absolutely vital for retention, particularly as workers manage increasing health or caregiving responsibilities.
The provision of flexible working conditions, job sharing, hybrid work, part-time work, adjustable hours, it's not merely a modern corporate perk. It is a necessary structural condition for extending working lives.
When employers accommodate the reality of aging, the need for recovery time, medical appointments, caregiving, they retain experienced talent.
The UK's recent institutionalization of the right to request flexible working from the first day of employment rather than after a probationary period is a huge step. It makes flexibility a default expectation, not a negotiated privilege.
And beyond general flexibility, we're also seeing targeted, proactive health measures being implemented at the national level to combat physical degradation and extend working capacity. France, for example, is attacking occupational wear and tear head-on with a dedicated fund.
Yes. Through France's investment fund for the prevention of occupational wear and tear, the FIPU. This fund supports actions to physically redesign workspaces and reduce ergonomic risk factors, like repetitive manual handling or awkward postures, which account for the vast majority of recognized occupational illnesses in France.
But the truly innovative part is the worker benefit structure associated with this. How do workers actually access this support?
Workers in hazardous conditions acquire points based on their exposure, risk, and duration. These points function like a currency of physical capacity.
So, for example, a worker might accrue 1 point per 100 hours spent doing heavy lifting.
Exactly. These points can then be exchanged by the worker for 3 distinct benefits: reallocating to a less exposed position within the company, funding vocational training for a career change, or exchanging them for an earlier retirement.
That's fascinating. It gives the worker autonomy over their own physical health trajectory. It allows them to manage their physical capital rather than simply being forced out when their body fails.
Exactly. It moves the responsibility from the individual worker suffering in silence to a systemic solution that proactively mitigates risk and provides a flexible exit ramp or a training bridge before burnout or serious injury occurs.
And Norway offers a fascinating model for maintaining workforce connection even during health issues through its graded return-to-work policy.
Norway's approach is psychologically and economically shrewd. It requires employees on sick leave to engage in some form of work-related activity within 8 weeks, unless a doctor provides a compelling argument otherwise.
So even if a worker is severely ill, they might still be asked to perform low-stress, remote administrative tasks for a few hours a week. Why is that required work activity so crucial?
It reduces social and skill isolation. It recognizes that staying disconnected from the workplace for long periods, especially in the context of illness, makes long-term reintegration exponentially harder. This proactive intervention was found to significantly reduce working hours lost due to sickness absence. It proves that maintaining that light connection is medically and professionally beneficial.
Okay, so beyond working conditions, we have to address the compensation structure, because this is often the massive hidden barrier to hiring and retaining older workers, the root cause of that initial CEO's hesitation.
The problem lies squarely in seniority-based pay models. In many economies, wage profiles rise steeply and automatically with age and tenure, regardless of current measurable productivity or strategic value delivered in a given year.
This creates that wage productivity mismatch we referenced earlier.
So the veteran employee may be paid 20% more than a younger counterpart, not because they are 20% more productive, but because they have simply been there longer.
Precisely. This structural inflation in wages, divorced from current output, strongly discourages both hiring new older workers and retaining existing ones.
If a company has to choose between a younger employee with high future earning potential at a lower current cost and an older employee whose current wage is artificially inflated by past tenure, the older worker loses out on the hiring decision, even if their experience is strategically superior. The company is forced to pay for history, not just current value.
What does the solution look like in practice? Moving away from a seniority model is a massive structural change for any company.
The solution, which is being adopted by a growing number of progressive German firms, is replacing rigid seniority-based pay structures with flexible, productivity-aligned, or task-based remuneration frameworks. Tying pay directly to performance and contribution rather than years of service helps mitigate that perceived mismatch.
Can you give us concrete examples of how they measure productivity-aligned value for a senior experienced worker who isn't just, producing units on a factory floor?
It requires a shift in metrics. For a strategic role, value is measured through several dimensions beyond raw output. For instance, successful completion of defined agile sprints or project milestones, the measurable impact of strategic advice on risk reduction, like Mr. Sato's insurance premiums.
The number of mentorship hours provided to junior staff?
And the documented skill transfer, exactly. The reduction in team error rates, or the successful implementation of new structural efficiencies. They're essentially monetizing the accumulated storage and interconnectivity that we discussed at the start of this deep dive.
And this approach ensures employers are paying for demonstrated value, not just historical tenure. It's contributed significantly to better employment outcomes for older workers.
All these changes, from job redesign and flexible work to productivity-aligned pay, culminate in one critical structural shift we need to see in hiring criteria to eliminate that immediate cognitive dissonance we started with.
We must fundamentally rethink how we assess candidates. Instead of filtering candidates based on birth year, a quick glance at their resume chronology and the absence of gaps, companies have to shift to focusing solely on demonstrable skills and proven problem-solving competence.
That is the only rational economic filter.
And practically, if the unconscious bias is so insidious that an engineer can be rejected over not drinking craft beer, how can employers structurally reduce that bias in the screening process?
One effective structural intervention is the use of anonymous application procedures. By masking the applicant's age, gender, and sometimes their name and address during the initial screening phase, companies are forced to focus strictly on the qualifications and experience.
The proven problem-solving track record.
Exactly. This process neutralizes the insidious effects of unconscious age discrimination that so often filters out the most valuable candidates, like that 58-year-old project manager who could have saved the CEO's company.
This deep dive really makes it clear that the problem is not a lack of experienced talent in the market. The problem is a pervasive failure of structural imagination within our institutions.
We're clinging to outdated HR, compensation, and cultural models that actively punish the experience we desperately need.
It's economically self-sabotaging. The most resilient organizations during periods of disruption and global crises are precisely those that retain that deep human institutional memory.
When the predictive algorithms inevitably fail, because they always fail during unprecedented shifts, you need Elias, the veteran manager, who can recognize the chaotic patterns of the late 90s and pivot the company to safety, even when that pivot is counterintuitive.
We've seen that targeted policy interventions work by neutralizing the financial risk for employers, that organizational programs like reverse mentoring successfully bridge essential knowledge gaps, and that addressing the mismatch between pay and productivity can keep people working longer and healthier. The path forward is clear.
And that is the final point. The complex challenges facing us today, from economic transformation and supply chain risk to digital skills gaps, cannot be solved by youthful enthusiasm alone, nor by pure experience alone. Pragmatism dictates that we need both perspectives, integrated and respected within the same team. Governments and companies must stop treating the aging workforce as a problem that needs to be solved by purging one generation, and start recognizing that the combination of deep wisdom and digital fluency is, in fact, the essential resource that will drive future resilience and innovation.
Thank you for taking this deep dive with us. We hope this knowledge serves you well.